Yippee, yippee. All right, so again, this week, it's chapter 2, even though it is week 3. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and open the end file for chapter 2. So a number of ways we can do that. We could drag and drop it. I'm just going to go ahead and go the long way, go to File, Open, and then browse until I find what I want, which in this case, in my case at least, is on the desktop, inside of a folder. Lesson number 2. Not start, John. You knew that. And then we're going to go ahead and open the end folder, or the end file. This way we have an idea of what we're working on and we can see what we're shooting for. Okay, so this is lesson number 2, and it is called End 002, I believe, or 02 End. What we're going to mainly focus on today is using the drawing tools. I'm not sure if this will actually work. Okay, it did. Awesome. In my office, this would not load. I don't know why, but it loads here, so that's all that really matters. But we're going to learn how to draw some basic objects using the drawing tools inside of Adobe Animate. You can use the pressure-sensitive tablets, but we're going to save that for another day because it's kind of a hassle getting them to work. What we're drawing is very simple. We're going to draw some coffee cups, we're going to make some text, and we're going to draw some shapes to go into the background. Pretty simple stuff to draw with a mouse. As things get more complex, we can break out those pressure-sensitive tablets. They're very nice. If you've never used one of our Wacom tablets before, they're definitely nice to use. And Adobe Animate supports tilting and pressure and all of that stuff. So it's very natural to draw with one of these things now. So, but that's kind of a lesson for another day. All right. I'd go ahead and kind of leave this open so you can reference it as we go through the day. But let's press Command N on our keyboards to bring up our new document dialog box. If you're on a PC, again, that's just going to be Control. Yes, ma'am.
How do I get that to
Which one?
because I have the files here. I put them on the creative file.
Okay. Let's go up one folder. Let's see. Okay, double clicking that one more time. You should be able to right click and download the whole folder. So do a save as onto the desktop. Okay, yeah, that's not the one. I do not use this at all. Share. So I'm just gonna download it won't let you download the whole folder apparently, which kind of bites.
What I'll do, I can always download them onto a flash drive that way.
Absolutely, yeah, I have all of mine on the flash drive. I have a hard drive where I store most everything else. But I don't like to plug it into a Mac. Okay, so for now, I'm just gonna drop this on the desktop for you. But yeah, that should take care of it. That's where they want to get down in the whole folder. And so now we should be able to go on that. No, absolutely. Anybody else? Yes. What did we open? Okay, hang on. So, two.
This one open, this one.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not gonna worry about trying to make it work right now. That one especially, because it's just kind of a pain. I wish people would quit changing stuff in this one. Oh, Max, you're so frustrating. Okay. Okay, this is what we want to open, I think. Yeah, so check that. Okay, see the .fla? That's our source file. And so that's gonna give us all the editable parts. Okay, and we're just gonna use it as reference anyway. We're gonna recreate the whole thing. Anybody else have any issues?
Yes.
Okay.
I need to do it from the email. How do I do that?
What email did you give them? Just go ahead and sign into your B Hernandez. There should be, so, okay, go Google, go Butler. And then there'll be a login for email login.
Oh.
Same login as,
That's my, okay.
Yep.
Okay, okay,
and then it's gonna ask you, do you wanna stay logged in till it?
okay, okay.
Okay, and then there should be an email from them, you should just click and follow the link.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome, okay. Okay. Like I said, we're only opening this just so that we can see what the end result is. Not a huge deal. Now, according to the book, we need to go ahead and create a new document. So that's why we press Command N or Control N on the keyboard. And the book wants us to create a web details HTML5 700 by 200. So looking at this, we're going to go up to the web. And then over here where it says details, let's change our width and our height to match what they said, which was 700 by 200. And that's a pretty average size for a little banner ad that might go up at the top or the side of a website. Okay, so Command N to bring up that new document. Select web and then 700 by 200. I'm going to turn off some lights. See, I can't be this lucky, but we'll try. It might just be a power thing. Sometimes I'm that lucky, but not often. Not today, no. Okay.
There you go.
Hey, all right. I am that lucky. What a deal. Okay. And then we'll just say, and we're creating what is called an HTML5 canvas. Not to get too tangential, but you need to understand Flash and Animate is no longer supported. The SWF format is no longer supported by your modern browsers. So what we're creating is an HTML5 canvas document, which if you're not into web design, it's just like those are words and numbers, and I don't know exactly what they mean. It just says that it is the latest version of HTML. and conforms to those rules. That way it plays nice with new browsers. Does that make sense? Okay. When we're developing things inside Animate, we need to be thinking about different ways of delivering our content rather than the web, such as standalone and things like that. So, but we'll get there as we go. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit create. How are you done?
Nothing so.
Nothing there. Shoot. Take notes as good as you can for now. Because they did say 3 hours. I think I've got it boiled down to about 2, but I do want us to be able to get through it. So the video will be available shortly after class is out too. So okay. So again, you can set this up however you like. John's workspace. That's not my name. Close enough. My layout's a little different than normal. I use the animator layout. I do like my timeline across the top, but I move my toolbar so it runs down the side here. So if you want yours to look like mine, go ahead and set it for animator and then move your toolbar. You'll remember from last week we can just undock things and move them around pretty easily. All right. So we're going to start by just basically covering some of the drawing tools. Now, when we talk about drawing, we're going to use these tools that are located in the middle of the toolbar here. So for the most part, you've got a pen tool. We'll be looking at that. That's good for drawing lines. We've got our text tool, which we'll use. We've got our line tool, which does what it says. It draws straight lines. In Animate, we refer to these as strokes. So I'll use the word line and stroke interchangeably. I'm going to demonstrate what a stroke is versus a fill here in a minute. Then we have our basic shape tools. So we have a rectangle shape as well as an oval shape. Anytime I see the little white arrow, it tells me that I've got other tools hiding underneath there. So if I click and hold, you will see that I have the rectangle tool, but I also have a tool called the rectangle primitive. And we're going to explore these as we go through today. We have the pencil tool, which again draws lines. We have a couple of different brush tools. One of them is brand new. We're going to spend some time with it. It's called the paintbrush tool. We'll spend some time with it today. And then we have our ink, our paint bucket, and our ink bottle. We skipped over the bone tool because that's a whole nother lesson for a whole nother day. So let's start just by grabbing our rectangle tool, not the rectangle primitive, but the rectangle tool. And down at the bottom, I want to make sure that where it says object drawing, I know that's a little difficult to see, but it's the circle inside the square. Make sure that that is not selected. And you can tell whether it's selected. If it has a black border around it, it's selected. If not, it is not turned on. So now when I draw this basic shape, I'm going to draw both a stroke and a fill. If I select just once, you will see, and I'll make my stroke a little bigger. I'm going to use my properties inspector for that. But I have my fill here, which is the inside of my shape, and then I have the lines that go around it. If I want to select all of them, I'm going to double click and it will select all of the continuous color. Okay. So I'm going to Control or Command Z to undo a few things and put my shape back together. Now if I want to grab both the stroke and the fill at the same time and they are touching, I'm just going to double click right in the middle. This is called merge drawing. The reason this is called merge drawing, I'm going to option drag to create a copy, is if these two objects touch, and they are on the same layer, they will merge into one another and cut. Let's go ahead and highlight those and get rid of them. Let's go back to our primitive, or I'm sorry, our rectangle tool. This time, let's go ahead and activate the object drawing. Now when I draw my shape, it draws it as a single object. both the stroke and the fill are encapsulated in this object drawing, this drawing object right here. That's very similar to the way Illustrator does things. Now, if I Option drag or Alt drag, again, I will make a copy. And when I put these two on top of each other, they don't merge. They don't cut into one another. Whichever one you use is completely personal preference. They behave almost identically except for that functionality. One of the great things I really like about drawing in Animate is if I hover next to the edge, I can bend it. And so now I can start to make, whatever it is I want to make, just by bending the lines. I can do that whether I'm in object drawing mode or merge drawing mode, either one. All right, so let's get rid of those. So just to reiterate, and just so that it's driven home, strokes go around the outside of our shape. They are drawn using tools like the pen tool, the pencil, the line tool, and the ink bottle. If I have a shape or a fill, I can take the ink bottle, which is this one right here, and I can drop a stroke onto that shape. Fills are the inside of my shape. They are drawn with tools like the shape tools, the paintbrush, and the paint bucket. So if I have, say, taken my pencil tool, and let's go ahead and give me a nice big stroke. I got a big stroke. And I draw this closed shape. I can take my paint bucket and fill that. Now, sometimes it's a little wonky and it doesn't like to fill properly. So we're going to say close large gaps. I keep going to the bottom of this toolbar. Every time I select a different tool, I'm going to get new options down at the bottom of my toolbar. Sometimes I may tell you what they are, sometimes I might just use them. Pay attention to what is changing when you select different objects. When you select different tools, you get different information. Properties Inspector is going to change, as well as the bottom of the toolbar. But when I go to fill something, I get the option of closing gaps. Now, it still doesn't want to close gaps. It says that is not a closed shape for whatever reason. So let's try this again. And I think I know what it was. I think I do. What it was I used object drawing mode. So technically it wasn't a closed shape. Here, let's try this again. Now it's a closed shape. Now I'm going to grab my ink or my paint bucket, and you better fill. Yeah, see, now I can fill it. 9 times out of 10, I will almost always use the merge drawing mode where I draw my fills and my strokes as separate objects. That's the way I learned. That's the way I like it. So you can pick whichever one you want. Just know that there are slight differences between the two. You'll learn them as you go through. All right, so we talked about our different drawing modes. Very good. The last thing I want to touch on is the primitives. So if I click and hold, and I go down to the rectangle primitive tool, or I have an oval primitive tool as well. But I'm going to go with the rectangle primitive, and I draw an object. It's going to combine my stroke and my fill in one thing, but it gives me options for doing things like rounded corners. This is not available to you if you are just using the rectangle tool. This is only available with the rectangle primitive. If we use the rectangle oval, I'm sorry, that's not even the right word, the oval primitive tool, there we go. Then we have some different options that we can play with, such as went a little too far. Well, aren't you just Being picky. Are you going that way? You should not go that way. There you go. It's not quite the way I wanted it. But now I've got some sort of weird alien Pac-Man. Again, it's one of those things you just kind of get in there and play with the different tools until you're comfortable with them. I will say this, I very seldom use either one of those primitives. So, okay. Let's look at some different ways that we make selections. I'm going to go back to just my rectangle and my oval tools. And the first way we make selections is with the black arrow tool or the main selection tool. And that's going to allow me to click once. If I click on the edge, then I will click on the stroke and select it. If I click in the middle, I will select the fill. If I double click in the middle of the fill, then I'm going to select both the fill and the stroke at the same time, keep them together. If I simply draw a marquee, such as like I did here, then I can select part of the object. There are different versions of this. There is a lasso tool, which behaves this way. So the lasso tool is going to allow me to draw a shape, and I will only select that part of the shape. Going down, we have what is called the sub-selection tool. Now this I refer to oftentimes as the poor man's pen tool. Okay, the pen tool is very powerful, but it's kind of hard to get it to do what you want it to do sometimes. You end up with great big curves that you didn't necessarily want. Well, using the white selection tool or the sub-selection tool, I can't select the main object, but if I click on near the outside, it gives me access to the vertices. Now, a vertex is any time that we have a bend in a vector-based graphic, there's going to be a vertex at that corner. Vertices is something else that we talk about a lot in 3D, and just think of it as a point in space. But using the white selection tool, I can come in and I can begin to really modify that shape quite a bit. So oftentimes when you're drawing, you'll start off with just a circle or a square. And then you'll begin to push and pull until you get to the shape that you want it to be. And again, the white arrow tool, the sub-selection tool, will not select the middle. It will only select the outside and gives you access to these vertices and then these Bezier handles, as they're called. All right. There's a little basics for you. Now we're going to go ahead and jump over, if you're following along in the book, we're going to be at about page 48 at this point, and we are going to draw our first actual object. Now, the book has you do several steps. If you want, you can just kind of follow along with me. First off, let's pick some colors. We're making coffee cups, and so they're using brown. They give you exact colors. I'm just going to select colors that look nice to me. So you can do the same. You don't have to worry about the color being exactly the same. So I'm going to make, my cup is going to have a brown outline and it's going to be a purple fill. I'm going to start drawing my cup by very simply drawing a rectangle shape. I don't know how well that shows up on screen. And I just used Command plus or minus to zoom in and out. Oftentimes you'll want to zoom in so that you can work closer. Now my stroke is pretty big, so I'm going to make my stroke smaller. Just double click on it, go over to my properties inspector. You'll see where it says stroke. I can either use the slider bar or I can manually put in a number, and I'm just going to make that stroke down to 8. So how do we turn this into a coffee cup? We're going to do that by drawing an oval. Now this is where snapping comes in handy. Snapping is controlled by the little magnet. By default, it just says snap to objects. So when I go to create this oval, I want it to snap to the edges of my rectangle shape that I've drawn here, so it's the same size. This is how I'm going to achieve that. Sometimes you don't want snapping on, sometimes you do. Here in a minute, when we go to scale an object, we're going to make sure we turn snapping off, because we want to be able to scale it however big we want it to be. We don't want it necessarily jumping to 5-degree increments. Does that make sense? Snapping can be frustrating, to say the least. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw a simple oval shape. Now I'm in merge drawing mode, and that's important, because this won't work in object drawing mode. This will only work in merge drawing mode. So once I've got the top of this cup drawn, I'm going to go ahead and using shift click, and I'm going to select the stroke for the oval I made. Using option drag, I'm going to bring it down here to the bottom. And it doesn't have to be perfect, it can just be near the bottom. I'm going to click outside of my shape to deselect. And now I'm going to start deleting the pieces I don't need. Wouldn't see the back of the line, so let's go ahead and get rid of that as well. So now it's starting to look a little more like a coffee cup. I need to change my color selection. Y'all can't hardly see that. How about a bright blue cup with a black stroke? That's a little better. Yeah, that's better. Now, practice double clicking and selecting, or single clicking and just grabbing one piece, or double clicking and grabbing multiple pieces, or dragging a marquee and selecting the entire thing. If you want to select more than one piece, of course it is shift. That's going to let you select multiple objects at the same time. I'm going to make my stroke itself a little smaller yet again, because 8 is just a little too big. So select the stroke, go to the properties inspector, and resize that to what it needs to be. Now the next bit of the coffee cup, everybody with me? Anybody completely just like, I have no idea what he's doing? Okay. You're an object drawing. Okay, so let's go ahead and what we can do is we don't even need to go ahead and delete that oval for me. Okay. Select this one for me. That's a drawing object. Now we can press Command B to break it. Now it's a shape. So now we're in good shape. Select your oval tool again. Come down here and make sure you turn this off. There you go.
Okay, then.
Okay, that's because you grouped it and it was a drawing object. So what we want to do is come back up here to the top level. Okay. Okay. Select the oval this way and make sure that this is turned off. And redraw both those shapes. Okay? Yes.
This thing just popped up.
I don't have that.
Okay, okay.
So
Yeah, it's just,
they won't let me
Yeah,
install
okay.
anything.
okay, I got you.
Yes.
So do I need to like double click this in order to get the merge drawing?
You need to break it. You need to draw it in merge drawing to begin with.
Oh,
Okay, so turn this off.
turn that off.
Okay.
Okay. Because all I did is just make the rectangle.
Right. And you could break it.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Your rectangle's fine. Go ahead and draw the oval now.
Okay.
Okay. It's because they're not touching. Okay, so how it's selecting all of it? It's because it didn't snap properly to the corner. So we can fix that pretty easily just by dragging and snapping is turned off actually. So that should do it there. No, it just depends. Sometimes you want it on, sometimes you want it off. You just want to make sure that you realize that you have it on and off. Does that make sense? Different situations call for different things. Here in a minute, we're going to do some scaling of an object, and we definitely want it off at that point. Now, the reason it was selecting all of it is because these weren't connected. So go ahead and try that now. Okay, so delete that, and then you can select that middle part and leave that there. Okay? All right, no, don't draw.
Oh, not actually
No,
drawing
no,
it.
no, no, no. Okay, open the book.
48, right?
Yep. All right, so we have an oval tool right here.
Oh, you can use that instead.
Okay, make sure your snapping is turned on.
Oh,
There,
okay. Then
okay.
you can use the.
Real quick, I'm going to drop a stroke onto this, okay? Now what I want you to do is, you're gonna hold shift to select both those lines.
Okay.
Option drag to make a copy. Now when we start selecting these bits, it's only going to select the parts we don't need.
Okay. Then you can just take
You
it,
can
take
delete,
it out.
yeah, you can delete those parts. Now we've got something that is beginning to look a little bit like a coffee cup.
Okay.
Anybody else? Good, okay. All right. So now the next thing we need to do, according to the book, and just so it looks more like a coffee cup, is we need to draw the inside of the cup. So I'm going to do this in a couple of ways. Watch what I do. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the oval shape at the top. And then I'm going to press Command C. That's for copy. And then Shift, Command, and V all together. Now Shift, Command, V is what is called paste in place. So I copied it and I took the copy and I put it right back where the original is sitting. Does that make sense? That's different from Control V, which is just paste. So now I'm going to come in, I'm going to grab my free transform tool. I'm going to turn off my snapping. If I hold shift and I go to the corner, it's going to let me bring that in. And that's still snapping just a little bit. I don't know why turn snapping off. So let's zoom in just a little more so I have a little bit finer control. But all I'm really doing here is I'm going to make the lip for the top of the cup. Does that make sense, what I did there? Not the easiest thing in the world, but this is how we start to learn to draw using the computer. Some of the things we do are different than traditional hand drawing. Okay, in traditional hand drawing, you'd just draw those ovals, right? This way we make sure that they're the same. Yes?
So shift command V or P?
V as in vary.
Okay.
So that's Command C is copy. Command V is always going to be paste. Shift Command V will be paste into place.
So
Okay, so highlight the top and the bottom. So hold shift and select the other. Hold shift to select multiple items. Okay, now Command V, I'm sorry, Command C for copy, and then Shift Command V to paste it. Now that's paste in place. So it puts it right back where we got it. Okay, so Command V pastes it over here. What we want to do is paste it here so that all we have to do is scale it down. So Command C, Shift Command V. I'm going to grab my scale tool, hold Shift, and that way I got the top of all it. Okay. Okay. One more time. Yes.
So I don't have like the stroke in it.
Okay, if you don't have a stroke, you can always add your stroke. See that brown line? That's your stroke. So you wanna grab both of them. So hold, shift to select multiple objects. And then Command Command C to copy. Shift Command V is gonna paste it right back into place. And now come over and grab your free transform tool, and then holding shift and go to the corner, you can resize it. Okay, now don't over sweat this either, guys, okay? Your cup doesn't need to look exactly like mine. You just need to start understanding the process of how we build up our objects. That's what's important. I'm going to do this one more time with my inner circle. So Command C, Shift Command V. And this time, instead of like scaling it, I'm simply going to move it downwards. Oops. And if you make a mistake, Command Z is your friend. Command Z is undo,
Oh, okay.
right? Universal, Command Z, undo. Take your time. I just want to bring this down a little bit. And this will become clear, hopefully, what I am doing as soon as I get done with this. So this is my coffee cup, my basic coffee cup. Let's put some coffee into that cup. So that's what we're trying to end up with. Something similar to that. But you've got to like make sure that object drawing is turned off. Again, this is kind of hard to see up here on the screen, but every single time I grab a different tool, I get different options, guys. Now, the very last little touch I want to put on my coffee cup right now is I am simply going to bring this down a little bit more. And notice when I hover over the edge with my black arrow tool, it gives me that little bendy line. So now I can just add some little details to my cup, kind of make the insides go in a little bit. Okay, I'll give you guys a few minutes to work on that. Take your time. Refer to the book if you have it. Okay. Let's grab the stroke and zoom in a little bit, make it a little easier on yourself. Okay, so Control or Command and plus. There you go. See, make it easier on yourself. Okay. Let's grab the purple part of the stroke. Let's grab the stroke, and we're just going to go ahead and hold Shift. Grab the other half of it. Okay, hold Shift. Okay, keep going until you have all of it. Okay.
Okay.
Let's use our free transform tool to go ahead and make it the same width as the cup itself. Okay, so no, we just want to primarily move it this way. Perfect. Okay, go ahead and make sure that they're touching.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's delete this guy. Okay, so go ahead and just hit delete. Perfect. Okay. We're going to select him again. So hold Shift, make sure you're grabbing all of it. If you need to, come up here and grab your black arrow tool. And then grab that center part, hold Shift.
Okay, here's,
No, so you see where the white dots aren't?
yes,
Go ahead and click right on that purple part where the white dots aren't on the strip.
okay, here.
No.
Let me-
Command Z. Okay, and then Z. We're gonna undo. Okay, one more time. Okay. See that little bit right there with the purple? Okay, hold Shift and click on it. Okay. Now you are going to Option drag or Alt drag down, and it's gonna make a copy. So grab hold of this while holding Option and drag straight in.
Oh, okay.
There you go. Okay. Command Z, don't split it. Make sure you're holding Option the entire time. And then down, that perfect. There you go. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I'll tell you what we're gonna do. We're gonna do it a little different. So Command Z, good. Let's do Command C to copy. Okay, and Shift Command V to paste it back into place. Okay, now drag one down. There we go. One way doesn't work. So now we can come in and we can start deleting the parts on the outside. So go ahead and select that top line first. Yep. Okay, now we do, go ahead, delete that. But we have a little problem as far as these lines. See, when I select this, it grabs all of that.
Yeah.
These lines should be stopping that. So let's make sure snapping is turned on. And I'm gonna go ahead and move these a little farther. So that when I select here now, where are you doing? Okay, let's try this again. Make sure our snapping is turned on, so that when I draw this, it snaps. And so, hold on one second, I just wanna make sure that it actually did. Okay. Okay?
So, to curve these.
Use your black arrow tool and just hover next to it, deselect it. Now hover next to it. Keep going, a little closer.
Yes.
what have we got here? Okay, right there.
Okay.
See how it got bendy?
Yeah,
See, so much easier to see on y'all's screen than it is mine. Okay, we're all done.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get rid of this guy, just draw a big marquee and just get rid of him. Okay, now I want you to start deleting the bits that you don't need. Okay, does that make sense? So let's get rid of this one and these,
There we go, now I actually have it.
and let's get rid of this one, because we wouldn't see that, that's the far side of the cut.
Okay.
And so now if you want, you can fill that inner part with a different color to be
Okay.
the coffee. I said, this is some nice detailing, but again, don't sweat it, all right? You're all gonna draw it slightly different. Okay, so again now, when we want things to snap together, make sure that you have snapping turned on. When you don't want them to snap, turn it off. But again, as the user, it's up to us to learn to speak Animate. It's up to us to learn how this program is telling us what is going on. And so it's very important, especially in the beginning, that you are paying extra attention to what you are doing. Later on, you can start to run an autopilot. It's not always the best thing in the world. It's like, but it works. Okay. Realize you don't need. Now, if we wanted to, we could again, I've already done this, but it's in my notes right now. So we could go in and we could select the fill color and change it. We could do that through our properties inspector, or we could do it even just right through here. And that's going to bring us to a way that we can make our cup look even more round. And that is by the use of a gradient. Now, a gradient is the change from one color to another color. That's all that word means. Now you can do multiple colors if you want. In fact, we're going to do 3 colors for our gradient. I want you to watch what I do here. Number 1, I'm going to grab my paint bucket tool. I'm going to go down to the fill color, which is fills are associated with the paint bucket. And I'm going to select this really simple linear gradient. It's the very first one. Now the cool thing about, I guess I have to go back and reselect the bucket for some reason. Wherever I drop this on, Now I have my gradient. I want to go ahead and I don't like the way that's working, so we're not going to put one there. Oh, I know what it is. I know what it is. Sorry. I have it closing gaps. I'm going to say don't close any gaps now. So now it'll fill properly, fill the way I want it to. That looks okay. Kind of gives it a little bit of a round, but what if I don't want it to be black and white? What if I want it to be a different color? Well, that's where I'm going to use my black arrow tool to select the fills that I want to alter. And I'm going to go up here to my color palette. If you don't have your color palette out, you can go to Window and then Color. From here now, I can begin to change this gradient all I want. If I want to, I could choose a solid color, or I could say it's a radial gradient, but a linear gradient is going to work best for this particular option, so we're going to leave it at linear gradient. The main thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the white part and I'm going to drag it to the middle. That would be the highlight. Notice how when I made my change here, it changes here. That's because I have those highlighted. If I did not have those selected and I made changes in my color palette, it would not affect the colors on the stage. The last thing I'm going to do is add another color down here, and I did that simply by clicking right underneath the color swatch. If I click the little color itself, double click on it, it will let me pick a new color, and I'm going to make mine dark blue on the edges with a white highlight. Might actually make the highlight kind of a light blue. So now I'm starting to add more and more details to my cup to make it look a little more three-dimensional. The gradients take some getting used to the way they work. If you've never worked with gradients before, something I want you to do this week before you go home and say, this is what I'm going to draw. I want you to make a bunch of circles and almost said spheres, but they're not spheres, they're circles. And play with different gradients. So like I'm going to go ahead and apply this gradient. So now that's a very three-dimensional looking ball, isn't it? Once I've applied the gradient though, it may not be exactly where I want it. So I have a tool for that. It's called the Gradient Transform tool. Now the Gradient Transform tool lives underneath the Free Transform tool. They're grouped together. They're both transforming tools, so it makes sense that they'd be together. Click and hold and select the one that says Gradient Transform tool. Now when I select a gradient, it doesn't select it in the normal way that we've seen before where it gets covered in dots. It gives me tools for doing things like rotating that gradient or making that gradient tighter or more spread out. This is a great little tool. As we go through the semester, once we learn how to make a mask, I will show you how to use a mask combined with text, combined with an animated gradient to make it look as if you've got a light going across your text and causing a highlight on your light. Okay, I can see by your eyes some of you are not blown away by the Gradient Transform tool, and that's okay. In and of themselves, some of these things are not the most exciting thing in the world. Luckily, they're not in and of themselves. We have a whole toolbox here that we can combine all of this stuff together. Now, am I going to stand up here and tell you all the ways you can combine it? Absolutely not. That is up to you. Okay. So there's our coffee cup. We're going to leave coffee cup alone for a little while. Okay. Now what we need to do is we need to go ahead and name our layer. And we'll just call it coffee cup. And it throws up that message, says no special characters are allowed because I put a space in it. I'm so happy the one in my office, it just puts the underscore in now. It doesn't tell me every time. It just which is fine. I'm sure this one probably would if it was, the one I was logged into all the time. And then we're going to lock that layer because the last thing we want to do is put other artwork on this layer. So by locking the layer, and that's the lock icon, no matter how hard I try, if I have a drawing tool, such as the pen tool here, it's not going to let me put stuff down there. It's going to throw up a message that says, hey, that layer is locked. Do you want to unlock it? In this case, the answer is no. Sometimes it's yes, sometimes it'll be no. So let's make a new layer that for now is going to be on top of our coffee cup. If I press the space bar, that gives me my hand tool, allows me to pan. Yes, ma'am.
My layers, that little area is like locked up and it won't let me click on the layer.
Take a look at what's going on. Ooh. Oh, that's because you have drilled down inside of a drawing object. See this right here? This will become much more clear in the next couple of weeks. We'll talk about this. But this is basically, think of this as a file system, and you have drilled down inside the folder. So if you come back up here to scene one, then that's going to give you access to that again. And because you couldn't access the timeline from where you were.
Okay.
It wouldn't let you do stuff inside of a drawing object. You can't have timelines in a drawing object. So that would be why. Okay. So for the next part, let me double check, make sure that I'm not skipping too much. Oh, okay. They want me to show you how to make a group. I'm going to show you how to make a group. So real quick, we are going to jump down to the coffee cup level and unlock it. And using our black arrow tool, let's just either select the layer itself, which will select everything on that frame, or we can draw a marquee and select everything that way. A group, think of a group as just a way to kind of seal up your artwork so that you don't accidentally add stuff to it and it makes it easy to move. Currently, if I go to move this, chances are that's what I'm going to do the first time. I'm just going to move part of it, right? Don't want to do that. I'm in the habit of always doing that, dragging a marquee and selecting the entire object, so I don't use groups a ton. But let's go ahead and group it together real quick anyway. So we're going to go to Modify. I'm lying. Good thing I wrote that down. How did you get way up there? Using gradient fills. Okay. So I'm going to go to Modify and Group. Now you'll notice that it has the shortcut key, Windows key G. That's also how you would group that together. And the Windows key is also the Command key. So Command G. And that groups it together. You'll notice now that my Properties Inspector no longer tells me about the shapes, but it says it's just a group. If I want to affect the shapes inside this group, then I have to double click on it or do what is called drilling down. We'll get into that more as we go through as well. But just know that there's lots of ways to construct things inside Adobe Animate. They will become clear as you wrap your brain around them, I promise. As I said, this program is definitely an acquired taste. Some people love it. Some people just want to get through the class and they will never use it ever again. And both are fine. I happen to love it. Okay. Have I really been talking for like an hour? Jeez. Okay, just so we stay on track, we're going to go for a little bit longer. We'll take a break at 2 o'clock. That's 20 minutes. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do, again, we're going to go back to, let's lock our coffee cup layer. We should have a new layer above coffee cup. We'll just leave it called layer 2 for right now. And we are going to learn yeah, okay, we're gonna do this. Okay. So this is a little different than my notes, I apologize, but we're already here. So I'm going to start drawing using the pen tool. So our pen tool is located at the top of our creation tools and looks like an old-timey writing pen. If you hover over it, it will say pen tool. If I click and hold, you will see that there are tools underneath the pen tool. These all have to do with the pen tool. The pen tool by itself is how we draw the lines. A line drawn with the pen tool is a series of points, anchor points, with Bezier handles that tell it how to draw the line. We can add more points, we can delete points, and we can convert points. That's what the tools do. But with the pen tool selected, I'm going to click once, release, and I'm going to click again. And why are you not drawing? Oh, because I have the wrong tool selected. That's why. You gotta pay attention to what you're doing. All right, so just the pen tool. I'm going to click and release, and then I'm going to click again, and that's going to draw a perfectly straight line between those 2 points. Now, if I continue to click and release, it's going to connect all of my lines until I get back to the beginning, and then I can close that shape up. I'm going to Command Z to undo that, because more often than not, when I'm using the pen tool, I want curves. And so instead of clicking and releasing, we're going to click and drag before we release, and click and drag. And if I continue to do that, it's going to continue to give me a nice curvy line. Now I'm going to continue to do this until I have a nice closed shape. Don't do that. Okay. Using the white arrow tool now, the sub-selection tool, I can come in here and I can access each of these anchor points that I've created. Now when I click on this anchor point, it's going to give me these handles. These are called Bezier handles. The way that works is however the angle that I have moved that Bezier handle to is going to determine how the curve either goes into the point or exits the point. I can also grab it and move it and adjust it that way as well. Like I said, there are other tools here, so if I need to add a point, I can use the add anchor point. If I need to delete a point, I've got a delete anchor point. And then finally we have one called the convert anchor point. That is going to convert this Bezier corner that I have here to a non-Bezier corner. Okay, so Control Z. Notice how I've got this nice curve, and that's because it's a Bezier. If I click on that, it just turns it into a non-Bezier corner. And cancel. Well, hopefully we all drew a nice closed shape, because the next part of this is we're going to start creating some depth in our scene. So I'm going to fill this shape that I made, this closed shape. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select a nice brown color. And then I'm going to grab my paint bucket tool. And I'm going to click in the middle. Now, if your shape is not closed, it will not fill. So if you have an open-ended shape like this, it's not going to fill. But you will notice that when I have my paint bucket, again down here at the bottom of my toolbar, there's a little flyout that says don't close gaps, close small gaps, close medium gaps, or close large gaps. Sometimes if the lines are crossing, but they're not snapped together, it will still read it as a little tiny gap. And so you say close small gaps. And if that doesn't work, say close medium gaps. If that doesn't work, say close large gaps. If that still doesn't work, redraw your shape. There's no shame in doing things 2 or 3 times if you have to. So now I've got a nice little shape to go in the back. And I'm just going to reposition it a little bit. Got a little problem though, right? It's in front of my coffee cup. It's not where it should be, unfortunately. That's easy. I'm going to grab layer 2 and I'm going to drag it behind layer 1 or underneath layer 1. So now we understand stacking order a little bit. When we talk about the stacking order of our layers, whatever's highest in the stack covers that which is below it. Remember that. It'll save you some heartache later on. One way that we can create depth is by overlapping our shapes and playing with the opacity. Now the way we do that is I'm going to go ahead and double click on my shape here again. I'm going to go to my fill, and right at the top, I could choose a new color if I wanted to, but right at the top it says alpha. Now, there's not too many programs around really that refer to it as alpha anymore. Most of the time you'll see this referred to as opacity or transparency. Those two words get used interchangeably even though they mean the exact opposite of each other, opacity and transparency. Okay? If something is 100% transparent, then you can see all the way through it. If something is 100% opaque, then it is solid and you cannot see through it. Alpha works on the principle of 100% alpha. It is a solid object. As I bring the alpha down, and it won't show until I release, unfortunately, but I'm going to go down to about 30%. You'll notice now that I could actually see through that shape. I think the book has us draw several shapes, but in the interest of time, we are just going to make a new layer, double click our shape, we copy with Command C, we go to our new layer, we paste with Command V. Now, as I start to overlay these on top of each other, you'll see that we start to get some interesting effects. And this is just one way that we could add a little bit of depth to our scene. So again, make a new layer. Go ahead and copy one of these shapes. Command C. Select the new layer. Command V to paste it. Something that we can do to add a little spice to it is to go to my transform panel, and then we could flip it horizontally. So I'm going to set this to -100, and that has just flipped that shape. Just remember, on the bright side, this is being recorded, so you can always go back and watch it. Okay, so now we've got, man, that looks like a smoky, tar-filled coffee house. But it's not the look I was going for, but that's where we're at. Okay. So I just did that out of order. That's fine. Got one more thing, and then I swear we'll call break. Okay. And again, that's why we have the book too, guys. So that when I'm done going through this, you can refer back to the book. Not easy to learn new software. All right. So the last thing before break is we're going to add some fancy little swirls to our coffee. We're going to some steam coming up from our coffee cup. So again, I'm going to zoom in with Command plus. Actually, there we go, Command plus. I'm going to zoom in. Don't work hard, right? If things are hard to click on, zoom in. Let's go ahead and rename our layers before we get too far. We'll just call these curves. Now you can have layers named the same thing. It is probably not the best idea because you can get confused very easily about what's what. But for our purposes right now, I think having 3 layers named curves is not going to kill us. Let's go ahead and lock all 3 of those layers. At this point, our coffee cup should be on the top in our layer stack. And let's go ahead and select coffee cup and make a new layer. Just make sure I do this right. For this one, we are going to use our pencil tool. So hover over them until you find the pencil tool in the toolbar. Make sure that you have your new layer selected. Okay. Let's jump over to our properties inspector. Make sure that you have your pencil tool selected, otherwise you're not going to see what I see. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and bring our stroke up to about 15. So a nice big fat stroke. Okay, we're going to draw a line, but it's going to have a nice wide stroke to it. One of the really cool things about some of the newer tools is the fact that they've added the ability to do things like variable width. Now, I've set my stroke right here to 15. Below that, we have a style, which we're not really going to look at too much, but we can do dotted lines, we can do speckled lines, things like that. But more importantly, though, we can change how our stroke is going to be laid down. And if you've ever drawn in Photoshop, they have this in Photoshop, where you can, and if you're using a pen, you can press hard and you'll get a nice fat stroke, or you can press soft and you get a nice thin stroke. We want to select the second option down. Looks like a laid out figure 8. Okay, which I guess technically the third one down. That's called width profile number 2. So that's going to draw, when I draw my line, watch how this draws. Pretty nice, right? So I can go in there and I can add a couple of beautiful, and I probably shouldn't have done them in black. They should probably be something along white. So again, if you draw the wrong color, not a big deal. Use your selection tool, hold shift to select multiple objects. Now we drew that with the pencil tool, so technically it's a stroke. So that's going to be the stroke color palette. And we're just going to go ahead and make those white. And I'm going to bring down my alpha quite a bit. I'm going to bring my alpha down to about 75%. So now I can see my wonderful shapes that I put behind, whoops, through my coffee stain. Yes?
What do you have the alpha set at?
For what?
Just
For those, yeah, I think roughly 64.
Okay, I didn't see it. Sorry.
Just random number. I mean, you know, whatever looks good for you. You might go all the way down to 30. Go below, much below that, it's going to be almost transparent though. So, and again, in and of itself, not all that exciting, but we're starting to build this up. We're starting to hopefully get comfortable here. Okay. I am probably going to skip that. Creating depth using alpha, we did that, that's good. Okay. All right, let's take a little break. We'll come back and we're gonna keep plowing through this. So I have faith in you. Even if you don't have it in yourself. I'm gonna stop recording for right now. Where's my OBS? All right, so we've made our depth and we've made our coffee cup and we made our steam, which looks pretty darn good. Now the next thing we're going to look at is the new brush tool. So let's go ahead and I want to name my layer with the steam on it, steam. So I'm just going to double click on that, go ahead and lock it up and make a new layer to draw my new shapes on. This would roughly be, if we're following along in the book, is going to roughly be around page 70. Okay. So this is kind of a new tool inside of Adobe Animate, and it's called the paintbrush tool. Now, the way they have us use it is probably not a way that I would ever use it unless I was using a pen. But we're going to go ahead and write out some text using this particular paintbrush tool. So it's not the bottom one, but the paintbrush tool. One just says brush tool, the other says paintbrush tool. Let's go over to our properties inspector. Again, I just want you to, on general principle, understand that as you select tools, you need to jump over to the properties inspector so you can configure that tool to behave the way you want it to. A lot of kids jump in, start doing stuff with certain tools. It's like, well, it's not doing it the way you did it. Well, that's because you skipped a very valuable step, which is configuring the tool to behave the way you want it to. So like for instance, the last time I did a stroke, I brought my opacity down or my alpha down to 64. Let's go ahead and bring that back up, make sure it's at 100. I don't want white text. I want to go ahead and select, we'll say a dark brown. And now I'm just going to draw out some text. And I'm just going to say Cup of Joe. But the thing with this is we have a lot of different options as far as how we want our stroke to be drawn. Let me go ahead and bring this over because for some reason that's hiding over there. Sometimes. Okay. So I want to cover these options real quick. They're going to be very similar depending on if you're using the line tool or the brush tool or whatnot. But first thing is the size of the stroke. The second would be the style of the stroke. We could use just a solid line, a dotted line, a stippled line, and so on. The really powerful stuff is the width. Here we can choose lots of different variable widths. Anytime that we see the cup, and I know that's really hard to see on these screens, but if you're following along, you can kind of see where my cursor is. You'll find it on your screen. But it's the brush library. Now from here, there's all kinds of artistic and different decorative brushes that we can use. In this particular case, we could do like chalk charcoal. So we have all these different stroke styles that we can apply now. That's kind of nice. That's kind of overwhelming, possibly in the beginning especially. But just know that you are not stuck with drawing straight, even, perfect, beautiful lines. You can draw all kinds of rough lines. Like, I'm going to go ahead and dry brush too. Why not? And so now, when I draw, I've got this beautiful artistic line going on. Okay, see that? See how it's all very rough and looks almost hand-drawn. Okay, that was one of the things that a lot of people don't like about vector graphics, is how clean everything is. It's hard to make vector look grungy. Not anymore. We have the tools for that now. So in your experimentation this week, when you were making your own banner ad, get in there and see what this stuff does. You won't break anything, I guarantee it. The very worst thing that'll happen is the program will crash and you might have to start over. If that's the worst thing that happened to you, you were having a great week. Okay? Because, like American Dad said when they're singing about America, it's not the worst place in the world. Okay? It may not be the best place in the world, but it's not the worst place in the world. Starting over is not the worst thing in the world. So you could write whatever you like. You could write cup of coffee, cup of joe, whatever goes along with coffee for you. Going to skip the creating of the border. Kind of covered that a little bit. But explore the different styles. Guarantee you will not break anything. Most of the time when we have text, though, we are not going to hand draw our text. We're not going to write it. We're going to type it. So let's look at the text tool just a little bit. If this were a banner ad, possibly one of the things that I would have would be a list of buttons down here at the bottom that would maybe take them to my website or something along those lines. If I'm going to do that kind of text, I'm going to use my text tool. Inside Adobe Animate, we have 3 different types of text primarily. When we're using an HTML5, we boil it down to just 2 types of text, which is static text, which is simply an image that is text. It does nothing else. And then we have dynamic text. Dynamic text can be updated very easily, but again, it's kind of beyond really the scope of this class because we get into thinking about deploying things on websites and using the web fonts at that point. So everything we do in this class will be static text. So I'm just going to select the static text. Now we get our basic text options like we do any time we are dealing with a text editor. So I have options for the format. I can align left, align right, so on. I can choose my font. You can use any font that is currently installed in your machine. If you are really worried about making sure that the text looks the way you want it to, I will show you what you need to do. That's getting kind of busy, so I'm actually going to shut some of that off so we can see the text. And I want to zoom in. So I'm going to grab my text tool, and I'm just going to click in the middle here. And no, I don't want to open that up. I want to make a new layer. And so let's do that. Perfect. And so we'll say Animate rules. Right? Because we love Adobe Animate. Just don't know it yet. So Animate rules. So now I can come in and I can change the size of my text. Pretty simple. I can change the font that I'm using. So if I want it to be Verdana or Wide Latin or whatever. Change the color, change the alignment, and so on. Now, as you guys noticed earlier today, when I open your source files, if I don't have the right font, it breaks it. And you have to pick a different font. One way around that, once your text is in place and you know that that's what it's going to say, you can press Command B. If you're on a PC, that's of course going to be Control. But you can press Command B, and that's going to break it. Do it once, it breaks it into individual text boxes. Still text, just individual boxes. Control B again. It looks like text, but it's not. It's shapes at this point. So it doesn't matter if I have the font. This is not text. It looks like text, but is no longer editable. That's one way to keep it from breaking if I don't have your font. Okay? You don't have to do that. I don't care if your fonts break. I'll choose one close to it. But like I said, the book goes into detail, and I do want you to read that part about how you would use web fonts and why you would want to use web fonts. It's going to keep your stuff looking the way you want it to out there. But again, after 2020, you're going to see very little of this on the internet anyway. It's going to be delivered in different ways. Okay. Now, aligning things and getting things where you want them is important. Making sure that things go where they're supposed to is important. One of the ways that we can do that the book talks about especially, is we can use our rulers. Now you might ask, where's our rulers? I don't see any rulers up here. Well, if I right-click in the stage, I get options. One of them is rulers. I could also bring up a grid. But let's start with just rulers. So now I have a ruler going across the top and the bottom. If I need to make guides, I can simply click and drag and then release. Now I have a guide. See that green line running down the middle? If I want one going the other direction, vertically, then I would just drag from the left-hand side as opposed from the top. And now this is going to be good because now if I create something and I want to align it, it's really easy to align to the grid. So I'm going to grab my coffee cup, or my guide rather. Notice how it kind of snaps to that guide. And you'll feel that. That's kind of a weird thing, and it's funny that it's snapping because snapping is off. Not that I mind. I want it to snap, but just one of those things. And again, as you're working, pay attention to what's happening. All right, you notice up here, things don't always function quite the way I think they're going to. I've got a lot of history with this program, so I'm pretty quick at finding out what the issue is. You will get there too. You just have to spend time in this program, just like any other program. Okay, I'm going to shut everybody off but my coffee cup again. And on the bright side, we are down on the home stretch here, guys. Okay. Now, next week, we are going to go into a chapter called Animating Symbols. When we talk about symbols inside of Animate, we are talking about constructs. I use that word in particular because we want to think about this symbol as a container. When I take my artwork, take my lovely coffee cup here, and I put it into this container called a movie clip symbol, it adds functionality. This is going to be kind of a stumbling block, and we're going to cover this several times over the next couple of weeks. We're going to start today, though. So hide everything but your coffee cup at this point, please. That way we're just working with just our cup, and we can see what's going on here. So I'm going to select my coffee cup, which is a group currently. It should be. There are two ways I can do this. I can press the F8 key. Now remember, we're on a Mac. So what do we press in addition to the function keys? FN. Thank you. So I'll press FN plus F8. And that is going to bring up the convert to symbol box. I'm going to cancel out because I'm going to show you an easier way to get there, especially if you're on a Mac, is to right click and say convert to symbol. They both do the same thing. So if you like F8, that's great. On PC, it's even better because you don't have to press that pesky FN key. Just press F8. But that brings up our convert to symbol box. Now, this is the box in which I'm going to create the container that I'm going to put my coffee cup. That particular container or symbol is going to be a movie clip symbol. There are a couple of other ones. We will look at buttons and we will look at graphics as we go through the semester. But just know that the movie clip symbol is the most powerful of the three, and it is also the most versatile of the three. So it lets you do more than, say, a graphic symbol does. It lets you do more than, say, a button does. It's also very versatile. So let's give it a name. I'm going to call this cup, and then I usually do something like underscore MC. Right? And that's not required, but that way when I see it in my library later, I know automatically, oh, that's a movie clip. Okay, so you pick up these little things as you go along. But I'm going to call mine cup underscore MC. I'm going to make sure that where it says type, it says movie clip, and I'm going to hit OK. Couple of things happen right off the bat. Number one, when I select the object on the stage, it no longer says group up here in my properties inspector. It now says movie clip. Some of the functionality that it brings along with it is the ability to name this particular instance. The other thing that happens is you'll notice you should have cup underscore MC in your library now. The advantage to doing this is if it lives in the library, it only counts one time against your file size. So what does that mean? If I were to draw that cup fresh 5 times, Animate is going to store that data 5 separate times. Even though they're identical objects. I drew them almost identically. If I make it a movie clip, I draw it once and I make it a movie clip, and then I bring out what are called instances. And I can do that very easily just by dragging and dropping. Instead of downloading it and storing that information 3 times, it stores it once in the library. Does that make sense? It's going to keep your file sizes fairly small. Now, some of the functionality that this brings with it is the ability to apply filters and color effects. You guys remember last week when we did this to the layers and we blurred stuff? Do the same thing here, but instead of doing it to the layer, we can do it to the object on the stage. So we can do, like I could tint that cup. That's way too much red. So I could make it slightly different from the others, right? I want you to pay attention because the stuff I'm doing to the outside of the container only affects that instance. Here in a minute, we're going to put a handle on the cup. I'm going to do that inside the movie clip. When I do something inside the movie clip, it affects all of the instances of that cup, of that container. Another really useful one would be under filters. Now notice how, you guys see where it says filters in your properties inspector? You should have one of your instances selected. Otherwise this stuff won't show up. But some of these are grayed out. Bevel, gradient, and gradient bevel. These are not supported by HTML5. These are only supported by SWF files. So that's one of those things at the end when we start talking about publishing, we publish to different formats. SWF is supports most of the features. The most features, I should say. But we're going to apply a drop shadow. I love drop shadows. They're really overused, but man, that's a simple way to make that cup pop off that screen, isn't it? Super easy. A little bit of gradient, a little bit of a little trickery. Bam! All of a sudden, I have a 3D cup in a two-dimensional world. But notice now again, when I applied that drop shadow, it only applied it to the one I had selected, not the other two. I'm going to get rid of this guide before I lose my mind. There we go. Couldn't figure out what that green line was running down the middle of my screen. Like, why is that there? All right. Now this is where your head's probably going to explode. And that's a good thing. I'm going to go through this and I'm going to explain what I do as I do it, and I want you to watch. Each of these is an instance of this movie clip. Changes made to the outside of the instance only affect that instance. But now, watch my timeline here. When I double click on this movie clip symbol, it is completely changed. I'll do that again. Here I am with all three of my instances on the main timeline. When I double click, or drill down as we call it, into that symbol, this movie clip symbol has its own timeline that I can do anything that I can do to the main timeline on. So I can nest animations. I can do all kinds of really cool stuff here. If I make a walk cycle with a character walking, I'm going to nest those animations. So I can move the movie clip and then I can have the arms and legs swing as the character walks. Same with a car. I could move the car and I could rotate the wheels. Now, watch what happens when I begin to draw. I'm going to go ahead and zoom out. I'm going to make a handle for my cup is what I plan on doing here. Watch what happens when I begin to draw. Whatever I do inside one is going to happen to all of them, because once we are inside the symbol, it's all the same place. I know that's kind of hard to wrap your brain around, but listen to what I'm saying. Okay? I know it's hard. You'll get there. This one especially. I have lost students at this point. Been like, no, that's not for me. But it's powerful once you wrap your brain around it. You can do cool stuff with this. So real quick, I'm just going to go ahead and draw my coffee cup handle here. What are you doing? Wow, drawing object. What is wrong with you? We're going to get rid of that. We're going to go back to here. We're going to well, we're just acting weird. Okay. Again, if one thing doesn't work, there are different ways to fix it. So I'm going to Command B, break that sucker. Now I'm back to my shapes. I don't know why it wouldn't let me not draw a drawing object. I'm sure there's a reason for it. Welcome to new software. But I'm just going to delete. Oh, I didn't mean to delete all that. Notice when I deleted that, it deleted it from everywhere. So be careful. So shift click and now delete. There we go. This is a horrible handle.
Oh, that's I see what he's doing.
Now I'm going to go ahead and change my stroke because I don't really like that. So we're going to change the color to blue. Notice how it's changed in all three. I'm going to change the stroke itself to black. Man, you were just being wonky today. That's so weird. And then we're going to change our style back to just a nice even stroke. And the very last thing I want to do is I'm going to grab my ink bottle and we'll just... Wow, you were being weird. All right, I could stand up here and fight with this, but I'm not going to do that because it's just... Was it doing it? That's so weird. Oh well. Okay. Now we got one little problem. Of course, that's a tiny little cup or a tiny little handle. Let's make that handle just a little bigger. That is going to be my free transform tool. But the main thing that you need to understand is anything I do inside that symbol affects all of them. And we will get more into this topic as we go through the book and as we create more complex objects. Okay, so to kind of recap, what we did today. The drawing tools inside Animate allow you to create very complex, interesting, engaging images quite easily. It seems a little overwhelming in the beginning. Practice, practice, practice. Drawing in Animate is great once you kind of get the hang of it. Now, you may love Photoshop, or you may be like, well, I can do all this in Illustrator. You were new in Illustrator at one point too. And you probably didn't hit the ground running then either. A little confusion, a little frustration is normal in the beginning. You should be a little confused, a little frustrated. That being said, though, you can very quickly create interesting and engaging images. Wow, that's busy. Quite easily. Some of the key things you need to remember are the drawing objects, or the drawing mode that you are in. Merge drawing versus object drawing. Whether or not snapping is on or not. Whether or not it's a stroke or a fill. If you're not sure, think about the tool that made it. If it is the color swatch with a pencil, you know it's a stroke. If it's a color swatch with the bucket, then you know it is a fill. For your assignment this week, what I want you to do is I want you to create your own little banner ad for whatever you want it to be about. Okay, so you can go with the same size, 700 by 200 is fine. That's going to be web. So Command N for new. We're going to say web. Over here in the details, just type 700 by 200 and then create it. You can make it about anything you want. If you really like coffee, make it about coffee again. Okay, if you're really into Nintendo games, make it about Nintendo. I made mine about the TARDIS. And this is one that I made. Very simple, very not a super complex drawing by any means. Doesn't need to be. But I used all of the stuff that we talked about here. I drew different shapes. I bent those shapes. I used my line tool. I used my pen tool for part of this. I used the text tool. I made this into a symbol. And I applied a drop shadow to it to give it a little bit of a bump to make it look three-dimensional a little bit. I drew the shadow out. I just took my time. And it's a single image. It's just one image, guys. That's all you got to make. The most important thing is just to spend time getting comfortable with these tools. Once you start, and you really get to the point to where you don't think about, oh, well, I need to draw that with the pencil tool because it's a stroke, then you can just start to try to be creative with things, right? I mean, the old masters, they didn't pop out the Sistine Chapel when they first started. A lot of the Renaissance artists and Renaissance painters, from the time they were little children, they recreated the artwork of the people that came before them. They would paint it over and over and over again until they got it right. Probably not a very pleasant, happy life, I wouldn't think, until you got to the top. Because I imagine they would beat you severely when you did it wrong. Didn't have the labor laws and things like they have nowadays, I'm walking around with my ruler smacking you guys on the head. Do it again! No. I would never do that. I'll threaten you, but I never actually do it. So this is easy, right? Gonna make something nice. Gonna pick a topic, okay? Let's keep them lighthearted, though. Okay? This is not a current events class. We're not going to talk about some of the really crappy things going on in the world right now. This is our little haven away from that stuff. So pick something that you're really into. I'm really into Doctor Who. I'm really into The Boys is a good one right now. I don't know if you guys have seen that show or not. It's horrible. I love it. Whatever fandom that you're into, okay? Think about how you can draw something inside Adobe Animate, use a little bit of text, and create like a simple basic banner ad. Like I said, this is the beginning of something bigger. Now, as we go through the chapters, we will continue to add more onto our skill set. We will begin to add the ability to add motion to our drawings. We will then add the ability to add interactivity to our drawings. From then, you can make anything you want, whether it be a choose your own adventure or a simple little video game where you just click on things and they blow up. Animate is a powerful, powerful tool. But the learning curve is pretty steep. And you've just now started that. That being said, if you don't do the work, you're not going to learn it. You got to do the work. You got to do the work outside of class, got to do the work inside of class. All right. I think I covered most of the major points that are in the book. There are a few things that I did gloss over. Feel free to kind of go through that as you're going. Yes.
That's the only time we're doing for
This is all you're doing,
Tuesday
yes.
till next week.
Yep. This will be due next Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. Okay. And then you have a week to turn it in. So if you still owe me from last week, you still got a chance to turn it in. I just take 5% off every day that it's late. If you wait 7 days, you get 65% on it. That's still better than nothing. Okay. Most of our assignments, I believe, in this class count for about 10% of our grade. Let me double check, make sure I'm not lying to myself. I think it's a little less, 8%, okay? So, in theory, I would rather get 65% of that 8% than 0% of that 8%, because you miss 4 assignments, there's no passing this class after that. You just can't do it. Actually, yeah, it'd be 32, right? That would give you a 68, which is technically passing. But if you get a D in a class, you should really go take that class again. You didn't get what you needed to get. I took a math class like 4 times because I kept getting like a 61 or a 62% in it. I'd get to the end and I'd have no idea what I was doing. Just none. Like, I can't do this. So, took the same math class like 4 times. All right. I know that was a lot, guys. I will get this video uploaded ASAP. If you need to review or whatnot, the book is a great place for that. Otherwise, jump in and just start drawing silly stuff right now. You can make it serious later. Okay, feel free to take a break if you need one. I'm going to do some housekeeping up here. Yes,
Quick question, real quick.
quick answer.
I think